Well, thanks to everyone for tuning in today. I'm sitting here today watching your wonderful faces show up on screen. I'm just so struck by the gift of not just learning together, but learning together with a group that's traveling together through these texts. Um, I can't help but think of there's an image in the Zohar, which is a big compilation of mystical teachings on the Torah. And the way it's presented, it's a group of friends traveling together and seeking answers to their questions through Torah study. In the language of the Zohar, it's the Chevraya, which is like this band of sages kind of wandering through the um, the mythical land of the Torah together, and each one they take turns saying, "Come and see." When we look at this text, we find the answer here. And that phrase, "come and see," keeps coming up, and I just feel that even on Zoom together, a little bit of that energy for us. So really grateful to you for joining me in this exploration. So, tachaze, come and see. Let's see what the Torah has to say to us this week. Join me in a bracha to uh, to acknowledge the gift of this time and this text and the gift of this community. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Today's Torah learning is sponsored by Carol Kranowitz. We're very grateful to you, Carol, for your generosity. And Audrey has been watching these donations come in. We are doing such good for the Jewish Studies program by offering these generous gifts. So thank you to all of you who have done so, and whoever is still thinking about doing that. There's many more weeks of the year to go. This week, Parashat Hashavua, which we know the name Hashavua is just from the opening line of the parasha, which acknowledges the completion of the life of Sarah. These are the days of Sarah, or the life of Sarah, and the parasha opens with the famous story of Abraham's purchase of the cave of Machpelah as a burial place for Sarah and ultimately for all of the ancestors, with the exception of Rachel. So we'll maybe encounter that later on. After the episode of the purchase of the cave, we follow Abraham's servant, who is now set out on a journey to find a wife for Isaac. And it's in this moment that we meet Rebecca for the first time. And I'd like to spend some time with you today looking at her story, at least the part of her story that's depicted in this parasha. She will have more to do and to say in the unfolding of the Genesis ancestor stories, but she has a very unique appearance in this week. Just think with me for a moment. The opening of the Amidah, we say we are praying towards the God of Abraham, the God of Sarah. We say Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, and in our community we've practiced this custom of listing the patriarchs with their matriarchal partner. But I'm always conscious that we start with Abraham and his spouse, Isaac and his spouse, Jacob and his two spouses. And yet, when we read this part of the Torah, it's pretty clear that the actual lineage is something more like Abraham, Rebecca, Jacob. Now, Rebecca seems to have qualities of both Abraham and Sarah, as we're going to see in this reading and commentary today. It's as if she distills both of Isaac's parents into her being, or whether she distills them, I don't know. She holds them and takes her place as a very, very important member of the ancestral lineage in a way that the other matriarchs are not. She has a sense of agency, even as we first meet her this week, that's going to grow and develop in her relationship with her sons next week. So I actually would like to start by just reading you a short paragraph. This is from the book Sarah Laughed. It's by Vanessa Oakes, and I have a beautiful inscription in this book from none other than Barb, Charlie, Becca, and Sarah Richmond, who gave me this book in 2005. This is a book where the scholar Vanessa Oakes provides some wonderful analyses and new commentary on the major female figures in the Hebrew Bible. This is what she has to say about Rebecca. And you may want to just close your eyes and just listen. I don't have this visually to share with you. So just a general, the curtain opens and here is Rebecca. Rebecca is the most fully drawn of the matriarchs. At the outset, she was a luscious young woman of marriageable age, a good catch from a good family. In the idyllic pastoral setting, she stood by a spring, drawing water for the servant of Abraham, who had come seeking a wife for young Isaac. She was outgoing and acted with generosity, drawing water by herself for both servant and his camels, and inviting him to spend the night. Her endearing traits were quickly apparent to the servant. With the marriage arrangements in motion, she was bedecked with the jewels she had received as tokens from the family of her intended. We know she had free will in this matter, for she was not given without her consent to be Isaac's bride. I'm going to read that sentence again because it's remarkable. We know she had free will in this matter of marrying Isaac, for she was not given without her consent to be Isaac's bride. She had gumption, the willingness to leave her family and travel to Canaan. She was a woman of some means, with a dowry of handmaidens and camels to accompany her into married life. She knew how to ride a camel, although one legend suggests she was so smitten and dazzled when she saw Isaac for the first time that she fell off. Okay, so now let's look at the Torah text. And I have a lot of Torah text to look at with you today. I just found it too hard to, no, I don't want that. To, just choose little sound bites. So I want to look with you at several passages from this week's parasha. Okay, here it is. This week we're calling our Torah study dedicated to Rebecca Matriarch 2.0. She is in many ways a newer version of Sarah, and yet she pushes the paradigm into some new areas. Okay, but let's first look back to last week's parasha. As we know, many of the parashiot in Genesis end with a lineage, a toldot. Okay, why am I not calling up that word?
Genealogy.
A genealogy. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. And it's just so delicious because these genealogies, I think I said this before and we've talked about this before, they look so dispassionate, like, oh, it's just a bunch of arcane names. And then there'll be one name that pops out and says to you, oh, but there's a reason that we went through all of this so that we could show you the location of this new person who's going to be very important. So here at the end of Parashat Vayera, after the Akedah, so we just have been through this huge moment in the Torah, we get this listing of names. And then verse 23, Bethuel being the father of Rebecca, Rivka. And that's the first time we hear her name in the Torah. And it turns out that the Torah wants us to pay attention to her. Okay, now I'm going to skip into this week's parasha, Parashat Hashavua. And I've skipped over the episode with the cave, and now we're with Abraham's servant, who rabbinic tradition has given the name Eliezer, but that doesn't come up in the Torah. And he's been sent on this task, as we said, to find a spouse for Isaac. He arrives at this spot, and it says, Vehine Rivka yotzet asher yulda livtuel ben Milka. Behold, now here is Rebecca, the one who was born to Bethuel, as we just heard at the end of last week's parasha, ben Milka, eshet Nahor achi Avraham, vechada al shichma. So she comes forward. The Torah wants us to know that this is in fact the same Rebecca that we just heard about up here. So it's repeating the genealogy. Thank you, Bob Barkin, for being my brain cells there. She comes out and she's got a jar on her shoulder, kada al shichma. And we learn about her, Vehana'ara tovat mar'eh. She was very lovely to look at. Ma'od, it says. V'ish lo yada vatered ha'onya v'timaleh chada v'tal. She was a virgin. She was especially qualified for marriage in these ways. It says here, going on, Vayarotz ha'eved likrata, the servant runs to meet her. And I didn't really pull any commentary just on this little moment, but it's always interesting to see, how does one character respond to another? The servant runs to meet her, maybe because he's already thinking something special is about to happen. He's, in the text of the Torah, the servant has been through a whole episode of his own anxiety. Will I be able to find the right person? Will God be with me on this journey? And it's as if in this quickening, this moment of running, he's signaling to us already, maybe this is going to be the one. And he says to her, let me have some water from your jar. She responds, Vatomer shte adoni vatimaher. Come, please, let's give you something to drink. And she rushed to lower her jar from her shoulder and vatashkehu, and gave him hydration, to give him something to drink. And then she goes on to water his camels in a gesture of selflessness, a gesture of service, a gesture of hospitality. And then, just to end this section, we find this servant, Va'ish mishta'eh, he wondered to himself. He was in a state of wonder. Lada'at hahitziliach Adonai darko imlo, thinking, is this the right moment? Am I going to be successful with God's help? Okay, now I'm going to skip ahead. In fact, the servant has said to himself, she's the one. And there's an interaction that goes on with Rebecca's family, saying, I'd like to make a marriage proposal here for my servant's family. And now we are in a vignette where Rebecca is with her family. And just watch what happens here. It's extraordinary, and it really, one of the ways we know that she's an unusual matriarch. She's not just any old matriarch. Vayomru, they said, her family, Nikra lena'ara v'nishala et piha. This is just this first sentence here. they said to her, let's call her, to our young girl, and we'll ask her. We'll ask her what she thinks. We'll ask her if she's willing to go with this servant and enter into this marriage. This, this must have been so uncommon in the ancient world for a family, most likely led by a patriarch, a father figure of some kind, to ask whether the daughter is willing to go. But in this case, because of who she is, they know they must do this, and she agrees. They say, Vayikru'u leRivka vayomru, they call to Rivka, and they say, Elea, hatelchi ima ish hazeh, will you go with this man? You know, seeing what you've seen about him and knowing the story that you know. And she, Vatomer elech, she says, I will. So it's with her consent that this new relationship can be initiated and formed. And so the family sends her off with her nurse and along with that servant of Abraham. And before they sent her off, now we're in here in verse 60, Vayivarchu et Rivka. The family blesses her. Vayomru la, Achotenu at hayi le'alfei rivava. Our sister, you, our beloved family member, you will be le'alfei rivava. And in the English, we're given this translation. You will expand into thousands of myriads, but alfei here has like a sense of infinitude about it. Like she is so filled with potential, fertility-wise, but also in terms of who she's going to be, that she's going to expand and expand and expand. And then they continue, Vayirash zarech et sha'ar sonav. May your offspring seize the gates of their foes. And this passage, this first part of the blessing may be familiar to you. It's very commonly said to brides at a wedding. In the moment of what we call in Yiddish bedeken, when the bride and groom are brought towards each other before the chuppah to have a moment of reckoning, to make sure they're each choosing the right spouse. It's in that time that the loved ones of the bride may say to her this exact quote, At hayi le'alfei rivava, may you, like Rebecca, be filled with this infinite potential, not only to bring forth life, but to step into your own fullness as a leader, as a mother, not just a mother of children, but a mother of our people. Okay, so then we quickly come to the moment where she does meet Rebecca. She goes and she follows the servant. And now verse 62, V'yitzchak ba mibo be'er lachayroi. He has come from this place of being seen, the well of being seen. V'hu yoshev be'eretz hanegev. Keep going here. Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh lifnot arev. So it says that Isaac was out, perhaps meditating in the field, lifnot arev, at the beginning of evening, or at the sort of just about to be evening. And you're probably familiar with this tradition that says each of the patriarchs has a part of the religious service schedules associated with him. For Abraham, it's shacharit. For Isaac, it's mincha. And it's because of this passage that says Isaac was out meditating sort of just before evening. So maybe it was mincha mariv. Mincha, the afternoon service. Vayisa einav vayar. And so here, these words have to be like in neon for us. He lifts his eyes and he sees. And we talked about this so much last week and many other times, and Kevin has taught us about this. When the Torah goes to the trouble of saying, this person lifts their eyes and sees, they're not just seeing in a mundane, everyday pedestrian way, but seeing something much bigger. So Isaac is lifting his eyes and seeing v'hine gemalim ba'im, and he sees this kind of traveling group, the servant, Rivka, her entourage coming with her. Vatisa Rivka et eneha. She also lifts her eyes. Vatere et Yitzchak, and she sees Isaac. And famously here, what happens when she sees Isaac? She falls off the camel. It says vatipol me'el gamal, and there's been so much writing about this. Does she fall off the camel, or as in English, in our translation here, it says she alighted from the camel, as if to say she elegantly lowered herself. But the Hebrew suggests there's something more chaotic going on here, that she's overwhelmed when she sees him. I never know how to read this. Is she overwhelmed by something majestic and beautiful about him, or is she overwhelmed because she suddenly has a vision of what's coming, of the very difficult married life that they're going to live together, and ultimately the loss of one of her children? Vatomer el ha'eved mi ha'ish halazeh haholech basadeh likratenu. She says to the servant, who is this man? Halazeh, this one, that is walking in the field, coming to greet us, and the answer comes, he is my Lord, the servant says to her. And in hearing that, she responds, vatikach hatsaif vatitkas. She covers herself. So she recognizes in her own vision that this is someone special, but now that the servant has confirmed, this is your fiance, she now realizes she needs to cover herself in an act of modesty before her new spouse. And that's a lot just to take in right there. So just allow us for a moment to envision this meeting of these two, and to see how much the text goes to so much trouble to describe a willingness to enter into this relationship, her willingness to leave her home and all that she knows, her reaction, and just compare that with Sarah. We don't hear any of this with Sarah. We hear a little bit of it with Rachel and Leah, but nothing compared to what we hear about with Rivka and the importance that she holds in this section of the story. Okay, and then just a little bit more. I just had, frankly, not captured this, so I added it in after. This is so important. At the end of this section, the two are married. It doesn't tell us anything about their wedding, but apparently they have a very nice wedding. Vayevieha Yitzchak ha'ohela Sarah imo. Isaac brings her into the tent of his mother, Sarah. And that's so significant. You have to hear that. Sarah, the last time Isaac saw Sarah was before the Akedah. So at least according to the narrative in the Torah, Sarah dies. She doesn't say anything else. There's no more moment with Sarah in it after the Akedah. The only thing we know is that she dies. And this little sentence here is packed with so much meaning, because in these few words, Vayevieha Yitzchak ha'ohela Sarah imo, we realize that Isaac has been holding on to his mother's memory with such intensity. He's actually living in her tent. And it's only in this moment, as the Torah tells us, when he has a wife of his own, and this particular wife, Vayikach et Rivka, he takes Rivka, vatihi lo leisha, vayehavea, he loves her. The commentaries will say that they make a lot out of this. He loves her tenderly. He loves her authentically. Vayinachem Yitzchak acharei imo. And because of this, he was finally comforted in the loss of his mother. So this is one of the ways that Rebecca comes to own Sarah's position and to integrate it into herself. She now, just by marrying Isaac and coming to him willingly as a spouse, has helped heal the most enormous trauma that perhaps that a person could go through. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't make an equivalency about trauma, but Isaac was almost sacrificed by his father, and it's only Rebecca that can help him come to a place of better health. So I'm going to stop the share here just for a moment. It feels to me like just reading the text alone together is so much. And just allow us to take a deep breath and make us just a moment of space here if anybody wants to say anything just about the text, because I now have some commentary that I want to share with you. But so Bob, go ahead. Bob Singer.
I just wanted to comment briefly. I mean, the portion is called The Life of Sarah, and yet it's about her death. But it just makes me think how, where do we live on? And this, this portion about her life is really how, her spirit lives on in her son and in Rivka. It was just that feeling that you could call this life because it's really about, where things last after you're gone.
Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you so much. David, and then Harriet, and then I want to go back to the source sheet.
I was just wondering, Isaac marries his cousin, if I'm reading this properly, right?
Yeah.
So I always get confused, like, were there thousands of people around this, this part of the Negev at this time? Was it a good match because she was kind of family?
Yeah. Earlier in the Torah, Sarah says to Abraham, like, I will just lose my mind if she marries into the wrong, if Isaac marries into the wrong family. Make sure you set this up properly and get him a spouse from the right place. Harriet, and then Shlomo, it looks like you want to say something about that. Don't forget to unmute, Harriet. Harriet, don't forget to unmute. We're not hearing you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My comment is related to a larger question that you mentioned a few weeks ago. I am so struck by this because that paragraph of taking Rebecca into Sarah's tent, it's the first time I've ever been exposed or taken in that Sarah had a presence after the Akedah, and it's just mind-boggling to me. So it relates to my larger question. You mentioned several weeks ago that we as Reconstructionists read 1/3 of the portion we're triennial.
Right.
So does that mean that, like, what we're talking about today, is that the portion obviously for Shabbat? And is that something we only look at then every 3 years?
Yeah, I mean, the triennial cycle is not a Reconstructionist innovation. It's used in all kinds of liberal synagogues, even very traditional ones.
Okay.
So yes, theoretically, I mean, technically, I meant technically, we only read a third. It takes 3 years to get through the whole Torah, and to be transparent at a Dat Shalom, we don't even read the full triennial.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. And we also don't read the entire Parsha.
Right.
Every Shabbat. We choose a section.
Correct.
So how infrequently is it just my experience that this is something I have not taken in before? Maybe I just wasn't in shul that day.
Yeah, you might have just not been in shul.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's
I
wonderful.
have to go back and look at. I don't even remember.
No problem.
It's Harriet. It's been 3 years. I don't know.
If I can jump in, it was 3 years ago when we read Chaye Sarah, and it was the Shabbat right after Tree of Life, and
and today is the 3rd anniversary.
Correct.
And the portion that we just talked about, 24:58 through 61, I read that then. And it was for me a moment because I prepared that Torah reading without a tape. It was because I had learned the trope. So I can tell you very clearly that we read that part 3 years ago.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Shlomo, and then I want to bring us back to the
Yeah, I
source.
want to go to David's question about how did he choose this Rivka? And there was a test. And the test was whoever extends hospitality, the woman who extends hospitality will be the one to be chosen as the wife. And that's what leads me often to say that Terach was the only decent parent in the whole book of Breshit. Because if you have Terach who taught Abraham about extending hospitality, and we read about that a couple weeks ago, that the test for who is going to be appropriate for the men of Israel are going to be the women who extend hospitality. And Terach taught that to Abraham, and clearly he taught it to Nachor, who taught it to Betuel, who taught it to Rivka. And as much as I don't like to talk about this extension of hospitality, don't forget Lot. When those two men came, he brought him into his house and said, "You got to stay here." I'm not happy about the fact that he offered his two daughters to the men instead, but he was so taken up with protecting and giving hospitality to stranger. And that's what's going on here.
Okay.
The last thing I'll say about that is
Yeah.
that I believe that this business of being open and extending hospitality is the first value which separates Abraham from all the rest of the people around.
Okay, great. Thank you, Shlomo. I want to get us back now to some of these commentaries, and actually, the first one to look at picks up very much on what Shlomo was saying. The reason that the servant goes in this direction, this part of town, so to speak, to try to go back to David's question, at least I understand, is because of Sarah saying, "I don't want you picking just any wife for him. Make sure she's from the right tribe." And here we have the confirmation of what Shlomo is saying. Although I have to say, Shlomo, I don't think it's always fair to credit the parents with the children's behavior, because then you'd have to also blame the parents for the children's behavior, and I don't know if I can live with that. But here, we're looking at some commentary. Here, the first one from David Kimchi. When Rivka says to the servant, "Yes, please have a drink." Vatomer shte adoni. She says, "Go ahead." It says here, "Lehodia ki hayta bat musar." It's showing that she was a person of good character, as they translate it in the English, of having good manners. But musar is as we know, this practice of practicing good character behavior, high character. Shelo hayta yodaat mihu. She didn't know who he was. V'karato Adoni, and she addresses him as my lord. He could be anybody, but she is someone who respects visitors and has that core of hospitality. And it even goes, the commentator here goes on to even say she was very prompt and actually drank directly from her hand. She takes the jar down and gives it right to him. I wanted to mention also, this is something that I was just thinking about this, I don't know why, this morning, from something that Rabbi Fred taught us a few years ago. This was when we had the first yahrzeit of our wonderful Hannah Lippman, and we had that welcome sign designed and created by Rabbi Beck Richman, Barb and Charlie's daughter, which says "Welcome all." And Rabbi Fred was saying the word for refreshments that you put out, like if you're welcoming guests, you have some cookies, some juice, tea, whatever. It's called kibud, which is from the same word as kavod. It's showing respect. It's not just a cookie. It's really elevating the importance of hospitality. And as Shlomo is suggesting to us, Rebecca is selected because she's quick to step into this posture. She doesn't hesitate, and she treats the servant, he's only a servant, with great respect. Okay, I'm going to skip over Ha'emek Davar here. So that's the first way, or one of the ways that she has the quality of Abraham. Okay, now Rashbam. This is around where the family is saying to her, will you go? It says, Vayikru l'Rivka. They called to her. And the commentator here is saying this is a matter of common courtesy. Even though God had already made clear what the godly wishes were in this manner, the family says, tell us what your wishes are. If you want to go immediately, im ha'ish hazeh, with this man, or maybe there's somebody else. Maybe there's somebody else that you think you should go with. And the commentator explains why this is important, because it was customary to give a bride 12 months. 12 chodesh lefarnes et atzma, it says in the Hebrew, to literally to enrich herself, to help her prepare, to help her arrange her dowry and make sure she's really ready. She says, no, it's fine. I'll go right now. I have what I need. So she rushes to do a mitzvah. You could say it that way, like Abraham. Okay, let's go on a little bit more now. So now we have Rashi commenting on that blessing that her family gives her as she's about to step out. This is the one we just looked at a couple of minutes ago, where the family says to her, At hayi le'alfei revava. May you become thousands of myriads. And watch what Rashi shows us here. At v'zar'ech tekablu ota bracha shene'emar la'Avraham b'har haMoriah. Is this not marvelous? It's the same language, the same blessing that's given to Abraham at the conclusion of the Akedah. After Abraham doesn't, in fact, sacrifice his son, part of God's blessing to him, to Abraham, Veharba arbe et zaracha. It's the same idea. I will make you so expansive. Your fruitful potentiality will be without limit. So again, hearing the ways that Rivka embodies Abraham's legacy. Abraham is still with us at this point. Okay, and now, again, David Kimchi, on this, also looking at this same passage. Sorry, I don't want to make you all nauseous, but I just want you to see this. This is the part of the Torah we're talking about here. Here, this is what I was looking for. Atayila alfei revava, they say to her, may you be like this infinite myriads. Vayirash zarech et sha'ar sonav. And may your offspring seize the gates of their foes. May they be somehow strong enough to protect themselves. And David Kimchi notices it's the same language. Vayirash zarech. So it happened that the wording of their blessing coincided with the wording used by the angel at the time of the binding of Isaac. Nizdamna lahem habracha sheberach hamalach et Avraham b'yom ha'akedah. So really lining up this moment where Rebecca agrees to go and be part of this marriage almost lining it up with the height of blessing at the time of the Akedah. I don't know if it get any higher than that. So this is a little bit of commentary from a contemporary teacher. This is just from the internet, from Julia Blum, who teaches at the Israel Institute of Biblical Studies. She says here, let us try to understand what Rebecca went through. She didn't grow up in a family of true believers as Isaac did. She didn't know God as Isaac did. But when Eliezer appeared before her that day, Eliezer again being the midrashic name that the sages give to the servant outside of the Torah, somehow she knew this was not just this servant, but somebody in him and beyond him, somebody much more than him, who stepped into her life and claimed this life. I suppose, like all young girls, she was interested in her future husband, but she knew almost nothing about him and had never seen him, so he was still not very real to her. However, that somebody who touched her heart through Eliezer, through the servant, was so real that she decided at once that she wanted him in her life. She surrendered her life to him. It's interesting that she uses the capital H here, in that one amazing life-changing decision of faith, a decision made so simply and so quickly, trusting him with her husband and with her whole life. And I believe she never looked back from that time forward. I'm not sure, Julia, whether she looked back. Hang on one second. Just wanted to close my door just because of some noise in the hallway. So this teacher, this scholar, is also sort of making an equivalency, again, she doesn't say it here, but with Abraham. Because what did Abraham do in Parashat Lech Lecha? He goes. He says, okay, send me wherever you want to send me. I get that something important is happening here, and I'm willing to surrender whatever I thought I was going to do with my life to this journey. And that's exactly what Rivka does here. She goes forward even though she doesn't know what she's going to. And she doesn't have, as Julia Blum says here, this family legacy of being in touch with God or feeling God's presence in her life or the life of her family. She knows something. She has some kind of higher insight. Okay. Now to go back to Rebecca's role in completing Sarah's journey. And this is from Aviva Zornberg, from her book, The Beginning of Desire, from her analysis of Parashat Hashavua. Isaac turns to his wife after his mother, and she's particularly quoting when she says, achar, like, again, so don't mean to scroll away too fast here, but just want you to see this exactly here. Vayinachem Yitzchak acharei imo. Acharei is this word achar, to be after his mother's death. Okay, back to Aviva now. In his relation with Rebecca, he finds a way of remembering Sarah, sorry for my typo there, of re-articulating the parts of his knowledge of her, re-articulating the parts of his knowledge of his mother. The angst of Sarah's death is healed in a relation in which Rebecca is both like and unlike his mother. Okay, and now Aviva Zornberg is quoting from Midrash Hagadol, one of the early Midrashic compilations. 3 years Isaac mourned for his mother. Every time he entered her tent and saw it in darkness, he would tear his hair. So again, the Midrash depicting this image of Isaac in a state of grief, of gloom for 3 years, living in his mother's home, so much that he was tearing at himself. But when he married Rebecca and brought her into the tent, the light returned to its place. The light of Sarah returned. He was comforted and saw it as though his mother were still in existence. That is why it says, Isaac was comforted after his mother, quoting from the same part of the Torah that I was just showing. The implicit understanding behind the Midrash is that Isaac does in reality suffer a kind of death at the Akedah. So even though at the Akedah we sort of breathe a huge sigh of relief when that angel shows up and the ram is in the right place and all that, but Aviva Zornberg is noting like a piece of Isaac dies. His mother dies, and with her the light of her tent, which means also the light of his home. He's an unmarried man. He's still living with his family. So the maternal nurturing is gone. In an astonishing fusion of images, the tent of her intimate life becomes the energy that affirms life. Light, claimed the Midrash, is by definition the meaning of ohel. To have left one's tent in darkness is to deny the value of being. The anguish of Isaac's reaction as he enters the condition of his mother's life, like dying like her, expresses a desperate involvement in the wailing of her end. He's still, like he's stuck in this place of grief. You know, we say that we observe Shiva and we observe Shloshim and even a full 11 months, but after 11 months, we're supposed to somehow start to move on. And it's as if he never has been able to do that for 3 years. Now Rebecca. With Rebecca's coming, the energy of hope returns because he now can see his mother's life as she really had her being. Through the prism of his relationship with Rebecca, his mother's existence, her kiyum, her maternal love becomes vital again. And so therefore, Isaac can move on with his life. So we're starting to look at the ways that the tradition sees Rebecca as holding both Abraham and Isaac's legacy in herself, embodying it, and then moving it all forward. Okay, and then just a little bit more from Aviv Zornberg. Focusing back on Abraham. And I put this in this order only because it's the order that it comes up in her book, even though I know we already talked a little bit about Abraham's presence in Rebecca's being, or the qualities of Abraham, let's say it that way. In an obvious sense, Rebecca, as she runs back and forth at the well where she's serving the servant, eagerly providing for the needs of the servant and the camels, she resembles Abraham welcoming his angel guests. She's impatient, she's energetic, she's overflowing with love, chesed, like Abraham. For an Isaac, withdrawn and haunted by the shadows in his mother's tent, she, Rebecca, will re-evoke the hopeful involvement of an Abraham, connecting, integrating, generating life. Abraham's servant's main criterion for the rightness of Rebecca's election, as this is exactly as Shlomo was saying a few minutes ago, is that he will sense in her the chesed, the loving kindness that since the Akedah had been lacking from his master's experience. He prays to know by means of her rightness that chesed is being done to his master. So in this beautiful part of the Torah, before things go kind of off kilter again, as they will next week, so much is being brought back into wholeness and health, comfort, a world where there's disintegration brought on by grief is being allowed to be reintegrated. So we have this beautiful new person who's holding the legacy that Isaac cannot hold for himself. It's too painful for him. She's the one that has to take over and move the story forward. And I only wish we could just stay right here, because next week it's really hard again. We only have a few minutes. I appreciate your patience. I just really wanted to share all of that with you. Nancy, you had your hand up earlier. I don't know if you still want to say something or if others want to add some questions or comments.
Well, my observation was, you've addressed some of it, is that why Rivka would accept this marriage, is she seems like such a strong person, and Isaac is such a broken person. And I guess it's her faith, that she's seeing God and she's moving towards that. But in terms of a a regular relationship, it just seems so imbalanced. And it seems like
Yeah,
she's
it's a great question. I mean, I think one of the commentaries that we read before suggests that she looks at Eliezer, the servant, and she sees something special, as if maybe somehow Eliezer is holding Abraham's energy, and she says, "Wow, I better run and help him. He needs water." And likewise, at the end of this episode, there's this enigmatic thing of her falling off the camel. What does that mean? Does she fall off because she feels so reverent? Or is it more, as Nancy, I think I hear you suggesting, she almost has a little feeling of doom, like, oh no, is this what I just agreed to? This might not go so well, but it's too late now, I better just I don't know. I mean, none of us will ever know. But that's a great question. I think, Gil, you have something. Go ahead.
The rabbis talk a lot about what age, how old she is
Mm-hmm.
at this time. There's one rabbinical, I'm just saying this one rabbinical train of thought that she's 3 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just giving that. From the story, it looks like she's probably
I wonder
10.
she fell off the camel.
She fell off the camel, right. Except she wouldn't have been able to do all the things she did at the well.
Right.
But she certainly is not older than 12. She's a Nara. She's had her period, but she's 12 or 13. She's a virgin.
Mm-hmm.
He is 37 years old, probably.
Right.
So, and one other thought, just keep that in mind in terms of the age difference. Literally, he is her Lord. I wrote in the comment, and this is something I felt before. Without her story is nothing. He's just his father all over again. If you look at his story, she gives his story life. She gives him life.
Mm-hmm.
There's one other thing I had to say, but if I can't remember it, that's okay.
Okay, we'll hold on to it and find another time. Luther, go ahead. I'm just going by the hands I see.
Well, she may have started out as just a really nice young woman, or a girl, because to me a 12-year-old would still be a girl. But once she realizes how broken Isaac really is, she has no choice but to be the strong person in that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And she has to rise to that.
Mm-hmm. She does rise to it, but I can't help, Luther, but think about maybe she has this realization that she's got to be the strong person in this relationship, and she doesn't even yet know. She doesn't know the story of the Akedah. She doesn't know what's going on. She doesn't know what trauma. I mean, as I say this to you, I feel so aware of when couples meet under the chuppah, we have no idea what we're getting ourselves into. we don't know what kind of trauma we're marrying. I mean, and we've seen that play out in all kinds of different ways as we've watched marriages play out. And next week, sorry, what I wanted to get to is in next week's parasha, she is struggling mightily with the one basic thing that women of that time, were called upon to do, which is to be fruitful and multiply. And here she has this enormous blessing from her family pointing in that direction, but it takes a lot to bring forth those children. And Isaac is a partner in that realizing the fulfillment of that wish, but not as much a leader as his father was or his son is going to turn out to be. So yeah, thank you. Audrey, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I see this as another way of when she looks up, she's changing her life's trajectory, and she's seeing and seizing opportunity and making the most then of that opportunity. She knows what her life is like if she stays where she is, watering the camels and just being part of the family. But there's an opportunity that is given to her, and she's going to do what she can with it. And kol hakavod to her, she really doesn't know what the future holds, but she knows that something can change and something can be different if she goes forward and she does something differently by looking up, she sees it. And I think that's a lesson for all of us. I mean, we can continue to do what we're doing, or we can seize that moment, look up, as I said last week, and change things and seize and do different things with our life. And I think that's one of the lessons I learned from the story. I don't think she's 12 years old. I think that portrays this in a really kind of different way, even though that may have been the custom. I understand. I understand.
You have to remember that 12 at that time was, I mean,
right.
If you only live till 35.
Right, exactly. But I just think that's a kol hakavod to her.
I join you in that. Yeah. Thank you. Steve, go ahead.
So two things. One is just trying to imagine a young girl of whatever age exposed to the boys next door, so to speak, and here's this exotic emissary, a parade that comes in. So there's likely to, especially if she's at the marrying age, there's likely to be some kind of excitement about some stranger from afar. And the second thought I had, and I posted in the chat, is this reference to him with a capital H, ascribing to Eliezer, and perhaps there's other examples where the emissary is a godly presence, or maybe has some kind of role being played that is in direct, it is the intervention of God, etc. So it's sort of, maybe Eliezer, irrespective of who this other guy is that becomes the guy she marries, Eliezer beams with the godly light, so to speak. Just a thought.
Yeah, beautiful. I mean, listening to you, Steve, I'm really struck that you could make an analogy between Eliezer and the angels who show up at Abraham's tent, at the beginning of Parashat Vayera, who also are not known to Abraham. It's the same thing. I mean, we read part of this today because Rivka runs to meet Eliezer, she's compared with Abraham, who runs to meet the angels. But I guess it hadn't occurred to me to think of Eliezer, the servant, as the, analogous to those angelic beings who show up with an important message.
That analogy is made often because Eliezer is Eliyahu Hanavi. Come in the beginning. That's why he's called Eliezer.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that. I don't know the connection between Eliezer and Eliyahu, but okay, Bob, and then Marilyn or Mark, and then we're gonna say goodbye for today.
I just think there was something that was always present in Rachel, and the fact that her family asks her, that's such an extraordinary thing. It's not just they recognized it, even as young as she was, and so it's not surprising that she would go on, because that was part of who she was, and so it's part of the the family upbringing, or her nature, or her special gift. She was extraordinary, even recognized by her family.
Yeah, thank you. I just was thinking, maybe they just know her and they know you don't do anything without asking her first. She's unless you want to hear her temper tantrum or something.
No, it's like Mozart's father recognizing Mozart's genius.
Perhaps. So is it Marilyn or Mark? And then
it's Marilyn.
Go ahead.
So it just strikes me that this Parsha is such a, we're always looking for the feminist part, the feminist strength. And here and there's so many sort of cliches about modern love and marriage, like love at first sight, behind every man is a strong woman. And then the fact that she knows her own mind and rises to the occasion, it's just a very good example of the strong woman. I also wonder if the reason that girls are bat mitzvahed a year younger than boys is because they are a year ahead of, a year ahead, or seeing beyond what the male young person at that point can see.
Right.
And then the only other quick thing I want to say was that I keep thinking about a lot of Freudian. I mean, that's one of my theories about why so many Jews are therapists, and we look into these psychodynamics.
Yeah.
And Freud led the way on that. So.
Yes, for sure. I was going to say, I don't know of any source that says the reason that in some communities girls are called up to become bat mitzvah at age 12, that this is the source for it. But you can certainly, anyone who's spent time with 12 and 13-year-olds can see that there seems to stereotypically be a developmental divide right around that age that then finds its way back together so that men and women can be, close companions and in all kinds of meaningful relationships. But right around 12 and 13, they seem to be on different planets. So I don't know. Okay, Shlomo, go ahead, and then we will say goodbye.
Just talking about the feminist point, I want to point out that before Eliezer even leaves on the journey, he says to Abraham, "What if she does not want to come with me?" So Eliezer recognizes that, and Abraham responds by saying, "If she doesn't want to come with you, you are free from your vows to me to bring a wife for my son."
Yeah. So that speaks so well of Eliezer and of Abraham, of the servant and of Abraham. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you all. This is such a delicious, meal to share together. And I wouldn't want to share it alone, have it by myself. So thank you for eating with me, if I can use that metaphor. Just before you go, I just want to make a plug for this coming Sunday. I've been working closely with our guest scholar, Dr. Elaine Pagels, who is going to be our Adrian Kahn Fund for Spiritual Growth guest scholar this year. We had to put that program on hold last year because of the pandemic. And this year, very, very fortunate to be able to resume it. She is an outstanding and compelling and deeply moving explorer of religious tradition. She's a historian of religion. That's how she prefers to call herself, not a theologian, as she corrected me, but with enormous insights into the history of Judeo-Christian religious evolution, and has some interesting things to share with us, not only based on her scholarship, but also based on her personal journey, which has been rather extraordinary. If you haven't read her book, Why Religion? Why Religion? ? I absolutely recommend it. It's just, as Susanna Juji Isaacson said to me, it's one of the most beautiful things she's read. So you can still sign up to come on Zoom or in person. There's room either way, and I hope you'll join us. Everyone, be well, Shavua Tov, and see you soon.
Yasher Tov, Yasher Koach.
Baruch Tieh. I'm so glad to see Myrna there. I just put her in the waiting room. Hang on, you're muted. Oh, there.
I sent